Welcome to the final video of this series. We're going to look at how do you implement the DCED standard in practice and what resources do you require. This video, consequently, is all about the practicalities. When you wake up on Monday morning going to the office to use the DCED standard, what exactly do you need to do? What work is required and what resources do you need to do it? I'm going to start by looking at a useful process map, showing how you can implement the DCED standard in practice. And the first thing to say is that implementing the DCED standard is not something that happens overnight. It's not a one-off event. You can't just click your fingers and have the DCED standard in full operation in your program. It's a process of buy-in and learning among you and your program teams. And so we're going to start off by looking at this process in the kind of program setup inception phase, assuming that you have a program which is funded, but starting its systems, entering a country, working out what it's doing. And the first thing to say is that you need to familiarize your staff with the DCED standard. Why should they be interested? Get your donors on board, get your senior management on board, show the benefits that it can have to them. As part of this, you need to develop the system. And I've introduced a kind of rough framework, but you need to operationalize it in your context. How often do you have review meetings? Who develops results chains? What kind of partners need to be on board? You can then give a formal kind of full training on this system, ensure that your staff know what they're going to do, and then test this in the early setup of your program. Based on this, you can review your MRM system and improve it so you have something that works for you. Throughout this process, you probably want someone to help, support and provide ongoing coaching. This could be internal or external, but the important thing is you have someone who understands MRM, the DCED standard, who can advise on what you're doing, help you collect data, deal with tricky problems, use data, and generally someone you can go to when you need help. By this stage, things should be going well. You should have a system, be using it, hopefully benefiting from it. You might want to think about an audit or a pre-audit review. Let's look at a pre-audit review first. A pre-audit review is just a consultant who will come into your program, review your system against the criteria of the DCED standard, and see the extent to which you are meeting it. And the aim is to get help with implementing your system. They might suggest changes, tweaks to make it more useful, more credible, so it's a learning exercise for you in your program. Obviously, you want to review it based on the feedback, and then maybe look at a DCED audit. An audit is an external process where a pair of auditors will come and again review your system against the criteria of the DCED standard. This is a process audit. They look at your documentation, your results chains, the data you've collected. They don't go out and collect more data themselves. And based on this, they produce a score which says the extent to which you're meeting the DCED standard or not. This is really important for accountability and credibility. It means that you have an external validation of the quality of your system, which means that external parties should trust the results that you're producing. So I realise in this lecture I've spoken very much about the ideal case where you start from the very beginning of a project, but we recognise this doesn't always happen. You might have a project which is ongoing, you might be part of a programme which doesn't have a defined life cycle, but you still want to improve your monitoring processes. So if you can always start later in a programme and do the steps above more rapidly, potentially with less testing. If you stretch for time, you might want to move ahead more quickly, implementing the steps. If you have more time, you might want to start out on a portion of your portfolio or a single intervention and try out the DCED standard there, get lessons about how it works before scaling it up to your overall program. So what resources do you need? Obviously, in a sense, it depends. Not a very helpful phrase, so let's try and unpack that. What does your human resource requirements depend on? Firstly, it depends on how many interventions you have. In other words, how many discrete bits of your project have an individual theory of change. Some programs will have lots and lots of really tiny projects, each with their own theory of change. This is quite expensive and time-consuming to monitor. Others will have much larger interventions where you put much more resources into doing much smaller things. This is typically easier to monitor and you need fewer human resources to manage it. Other important questions are how much MRM work your technical team do. Are you trying to leave everything to your MRM department, or are your technical team deeply embedded in collecting and analysing data? And secondly, how much do you outsource your work? Are you doing all of this data collection in-house, or are you hiring a firm, for example, to help you with it? A rough estimate, which you can tailor to what you're doing, is 1 MRM staff for 3 to 4 technical staff. And often they work together in a team, let's say in a market-based sector. So maybe this is your horticulture team, where the MRM staff are working alongside the technical staff to define what they're doing, setting up the results chains, collecting information and feeding it back to the team. And of course, it's not just about quantity of staff, you also need to think about quality, making sure your MRM staff have not just the technical skills, but also the soft skills of facilitation, communication, relationship building, and being comfortable getting out of the office to collect data and meet with your project partners and beneficiaries. And now we come to financial resources. Here, I'm not going to give you a number, but I will talk through a couple of the major cost points and talk about how you can budget for it. So the first one, of course, is MRM staff. How many do you need? How much do they cost? The second one is data collection, and this would include enumerators, transport, accommodation, per diems, and so on. An easy way to budget for data collection is to think about how many interventions you'll have. Let's say you'll have 10 a year, whatever it is, and think about how much data collection you would do for each intervention. Maybe you would do 2 field trips, you would do 1 baseline, 1 end-line survey, something like that, and then try and calculate how much you end up spending on data collection. Of course, you need training, but also support, either consultancy, support from your head office, or support from a person within your program who understands the standard. And finally, audits. Information on budgeting for audits is contained on our website, so you can look there for more details on it. I want to talk about a final resource, which is often really important and often not really considered, and this is time. Time is often the limiting factor for development programs. You find that everyone is really busy running around trying to get stuff done, but this means that staff don't have the time to set up good monitoring systems, also to use the results when they come in. So you need to think about staff time for understanding and using your results measurement data, revising the results chains, revising your interventions, communicating and working with the results measurement team, and the intervention team should also be participating in results measurement themselves, not managing surveys, but at least going out to the field and understanding what's happening within their sectors and markets. You can find out more on our website, so we have a lot of more resources available. You can find out more about the DCED Standard online on the rest of this website. We have a list of consultants who can support, or other programs who are using the standard who might be able to give you some advice. And finally, if you're interested in having an audit of your measurement system, read our guidance and get in touch with us to learn more about the process.